Hello, I'm the Past Master. Welcome to my YouTube channel. As you can see, I've been cultivating my caveman chic during lockdown, so apologies if you find it a little bit too hipster for you. Now today I'm going to be coming back to a topic that I've covered in a past video, the past matters. And this is a topic close to my heart. It's the topic of family history. So today I want to share with you some of my own family history, talk about how that's motivated me, and also talk about how I'm hoping to share that with students at school when I start my teaching in September. So what I'm going to be focusing on today is colonial history. I've got a lot of colonial history in my background, and some in fact on both sides of my family. It's an indication, perhaps, how important the empire and colonies have been to Britain's past, and that's not just for people of colour in the UK, but for white people as well. So, for example, on my father's side, his grandfather abandoned his father as a little boy and his grandmother and went off to live in Australia. On my mother's side, the stories are rather more positive. So her grandfather and grandmother, Billy and Pearl Poulton, were pioneer settlers in Kenya, and before that they'd both been born and raised in South Africa. So it was the South Africa story which really got me as a child, and in particular stories about how my great-grandfather, Billy Poulton, was the captain of the Orange Free State rugby team. Now, with no rugby playing role models amongst my parents really, or my uncles and aunts, it was quite important for me as a rugby player that I could look up to someone. And my great-grandfather was for me a sort of Lee Halfpenny figure, a heroic fullback who led his team, and apparently as captain he didn't drink alcohol because he had to drive the wagon home after the match. So all the boys would be roaring drunk and he was the kind of designated driver, which apparently you needed even for an ox cart in the early 20th century. Well, anyway, so Billy Poulton played rugby for Orange Free State, and then he decided to make a change to his farming lifestyle in South Africa after the First World War. So the war, as for many people, had proven a catalyst for change. In America, it was the American Civil War which really kick-started the migration west. But in this case, he had been living in South Africa, he fought across southern Africa and visited places like Nyasaland, modern-day Malawi. And he saw the land there and he thought, ooh, I like the look of that. So he decided to buy some land in Nyasaland and settle there with his family. He and my great-grandmother Pearl decided they would buy the land, and off he went to the land office, the place where you made the deal. You registered your interest, perhaps, a bit like the pioneer settlers in America. However, and this is where you really start to see that the past is a very different place, a foreign continent, to what we experience today. On the train to the land office, he met someone who had just bought 4,000 acres of land in Kenya. And rather than buying land in Nyasaland, making a deal with the land office, he made a deal with this guy that he would farm the land in Kenya, the 4,000 acres of unfarmed land, for 5 years for free, effectively. And then at the end of that, he had the option to buy it if he wished to. So this was incredible promise, an incredible business deal with someone he'd never met before, as far as I know, on which to base his family's future. But that's exactly what he did. He made the deal and off they went to Kenya. He and a friend went out there first in late 1920, built a house, broke the ground, planted some flax, and then my great-grandmother and her 3-month-old child came out in early 1921. So you have to imagine this. They've travelled thousands of kilometres to a place they've never visited before. They've given up their old life. They've staked everything on this move to Kenya. I mean, it's an extraordinary, extraordinary gamble. And I don't know how my great-grandmother would have felt, really, setting foot from the train at the platform and realising she still had a 12-mile journey across rough country ahead of her just to get to the place that they were living in. Okay, I mean, extraordinary courage, I think it would have taken to do this. In fact, she had to wait for a while and then go via ox-drawn sleigh because the route was too rough for carts. So that was the kind of primitive situation they were dealing with. Anyhow, she made it to the farm, like the pioneers in the American West made it to their 160-acre plots. And my great-grandfather and great-grandmother set up their farm. And it was tough. There were so many challenges to this pioneer lifestyle. For example, the wild animals. A pair of lions took 4 of their oxen before they could kill them. After that, there was rather a picturesque moment in their lives when local tribespeople descended on the farm, desperate for a share of the lion, because of course lions were powerful animals which were believed to have magical powers which could help the people. So that was an interesting moment in their lives, but they had lost 4 of their important animals to these lions, and they had to hunt the lions just like, I guess, primitive people would have hunted lions in the past to protect their own, primitive farmers. So it was a pretty rough existence. They had very, very, very little money. Their first crop of flax didn't exactly fail, but when it was planted, the flax market was booming, and when they harvested it, no one wanted to buy. So they had to use it to thatch their buildings. And really, there were a lot of times in their early lives on the farm that they depended on my great-grandfather to run odd jobs to make enough money for them to survive. So, for example, he was an expert gelder. He was very good at castrating horses. This was an important skill. No one else locally had it. So his services were very much in demand. Modern-day farmers also do non-farming jobs to help make ends meet. But it's interesting to see how important such a skill could be out in pioneer country in Kenya in the 1920s. But even if money hadn't been such a problem, it was extraordinary that they had to build everything up, not once, but twice from scratch. So their initial farm that they had the free use of from 1920, the mortgage, the owner's mortgage was foreclosed by the bank after the local Kenyan currency, the rupee, was devalued in the 1920s, which meant effectively, since they couldn't at that stage afford to buy the 4,000 acres, that my great-grandparents had to relocate again. They had to do everything again or go back to South Africa. Now, most of us and many people faced with similar problems in America might just have sold up and gone back, but they didn't. They stuck it. They bought an adjacent property of 800 acres and they worked hard to build that up from scratch again. So that was the kind of people that they were, managing twice to start a new life from scratch. Very little transport, very little contact with the outside world, no radio, no television, 12 miles across rough country to the railway, no doctor for 50 miles. I mean, really, this was an extraordinary, challenging existence, and not that dissimilar, you might think, from the world of the Wild West. Now, to get through all of this took, I think, an extraordinary character, and some of that character is revealed in what my great-grandmother wrote. So, for example, she talks about the wonderful people, the local Kipsigis, many of whom worked with them, and the other neighbours, the white neighbours on the farms surrounding their own. And she says, these were the days when faith, hope and charity were equal. To me, this seems to be an allusion to her own faith and to a belief that it was friendship and faith that glued together their lives in these difficult times, that gave them consolation and determination to get through that series of challenges. So I think that it's interesting to note that, like the American pioneers of the Midwest in the 19th century, my great-grandparents were motivated and inspired by their faith and their friendships. Perhaps, like America, they felt there was a kind of manifest destiny to own and cultivate the land, but certainly they felt that it was Providence that had brought them to where they were, that there was some kind of bigger plan, some kind of bigger possibility, even in the midst of all of this hardship. And when I say hardship, it's the sort of thing that would be unimaginable to us today. For example, not having a holiday for 5 years, spending 2 years, in my great-grandmother's case, almost entirely on this plot of land. I think that it was similar for many of the American settlers, albeit they may not have had quite so much land or quite such fertile land. So, for example, there was a wave of settlers in the late 1870s in Kansas known as the Exodusters, and these were black American people who had come from the deep south, motivated by a sense that Kansas was promised to them. It was a kind of promised land, and that they were making an exodus of biblical proportions to a better life. Their faith influenced them even to the extent that they named settlements in biblical terms. So, for example, Nicodemus was one of the towns that was set up by these people. Now, I'm not saying that all of these people stuck it, that they stayed on. And in fact, many of the settlers in America either gave up and sold up and went back, or they gave up and sold up and moved on to another plot of land. But it's clear that people had a determination stoked by their faith in themselves, in their friends and their God, which perhaps we struggle to understand in the same way today. Well, so that's everything from me today. Thank you for watching, and the Past Master will be back soon with more videos. Goodbye.